The stars above Cadia pulsed with a dull, sickly light. Once, they had shone like beacons of defiance, guardians of the Cadian Gate. Now, they seemed to flicker with uncertainty, distorted by the ever-bleeding wound in reality that hovered near the fortress world. The eye of terror yawned wide in the void, a swirling storm of unreality through which madness seeped into the galaxy. And from that storm came death. Cadia had always stood. For 10,000 years, it had endured the worst the galaxy had to offer. Demon incursions, Black Crusades, warp storms, and heresies. It had weathered them all. The people of Cadia were not simply defenders of the Imperium. They were its wall, its edge, its shield. Children were taught to march before they could walk. A soldier's creed was a lullaby, and every soul born beneath Cadia's pale sky understood the cost of their survival. The coming storm, however, was unlike any before. Even before the first ships broke warp near the system, something had changed. Psychers across the segmentum obscurus screamed in unison and burst into flame. Astropaths babbled mad prophecies, scratching symbols into their flesh until restrained or killed. In the Imperial Palace on Terra, the Emperor's Tarot revealed cards not drawn in over 7 millennia. The stars themselves rebelled against the gaze of order. The Cadian High Command, hardened by centuries of relentless vigilance, understood instantly Abaddon had returned. The 13th Black Crusade, the culmination of centuries of dark preparation, surged in the eye of terror in waves of annihilation. At the vanguard came the Black Legion, sleek obsidian vessels carved with blasphemous runes and glowing with warp energy. Behind them followed the crimson warships of the Word-Bearers, the rusted, disease-ridden hulks of the Death Guard, the blood-painted monstrosities of the World Eaters, and horrors that defied understanding. Void-born entities pulled from the warp to aid their master's crusade. Above Cadia's orbit, the will of eternity emerged like a god of iron, eclipsing the stars with its size. The massive space fortress, once a blackstone fortress of the ancient Xenos known as the Old Ones, now served as Abaddon's flagship and the axis upon which his invasion turned. With it, he brought weapons of unfathomable power, forged in the deepest vaults of the Dark Mechanicum. But Cadia was not unguarded. Fleet Cordis, battered and diminished from years of attrition, still held the line in high orbit. The Cadian defense grid, though strained, remained partially intact. Bastion-class platforms fired opening salvos, lancing the void with coordinated fury. Astra Militarum regiments from across the segmentum manned their defensive posts, reinforced by Adeptus Astartes detachments, Sisters of Battle, and a score of lesser Imperial forces. Foremost among them were the Cadians themselves, hard-eyed, grim-faced men and women who had never known a life beyond war. They did not speak of victory, only endurance. As the first Chaos vessels breached the defense perimeter, the void lit up like a sun-going nova. Macro cannon barges tore through the dark, striking trailing Chaos ships and vaporizing escorts. But it was not enough. There were too many. The will of eternity began its descent, slow and unstoppable. Beneath its advance, Imperial void defenses crumbled. The void war turned chaotic, a brutal ballet of explosions, torpedoes, and boarding actions. Strike cruisers from the Black Templars and Imperial Fists surged forward to meet the threat in close quarters, their boarding torpedoes hammering into the heretic hulls like spears of judgment. Yet for every Chaos vessel destroyed, 2 more emerged from the warp. On the surface of Cadia, the mood shifted from readiness to inevitability. Defense laser grids fired constantly into orbit, cutting down drop pods and atmosphere-burned debris. Shield walls were raised, trench lines dug deeper, and civilian bunkers sealed for what all knew might be the last time. General Krieg, Thrax of the Cadian 8th, commander of ground defenses, issued the final orders with cold clarity. Hold the surface, delay the enemy, buy time for reinforcements. There would be no retreat, no surrender. Cadia would be the crucible upon which chaos would break, or all would be lost. And so the great siege began. The first landing struck at Kazarkroft and Kazar-Vortigern, fortified cities that had stood for millennia. The Word-Bearers came first, their crimson armor gleaming with oaths of blasphemy, chanting twisted litanies that burned the ears of those who heard them. Warp portals tore open in the heart of the city, disgorging hordes of demons howling with hunger. The walls held for hours, then minutes, then fell. Kazarkroft was swallowed in a firestorm of sorcery and slaughter. From a northern pole came the Iron Warriors, siege masters of old. They did not storm the walls. They reduced them, line by line, bastion by bastion. They advanced with brutal precision, setting up artillery nests and Mauler field generators that slowly crushed everything in their path. Behind them walked Traitor Guard, twisted reflections of the Astra Militarum, screaming praise to dark gods and impaling prisoners on makeshift banners. At the center of the defense, over the ruins of Khazar Pardix, the Cadian Gate held fast. Sergeant Mellon, a 30-year veteran of 3 Black Crusades, stood atop the trench line, lost gun in hand, and watched the sky rain fire. Around him, men and women sang the old battle hymns. They did not sing in joy, but in remembrance. Every bullet, every shell, every scream, it was all for Cadia. And Cadia had not yet fallen. On the 3rd day of the siege, the sky turned green. It began as a whisper through the Vox channels, garbled and layered with static. Then came the pulsing hum that vibrated through the bones of every living thing. Those with even the faintest psychic sensitivity dropped to their knees, blood pouring from their noses, ears, and eyes. Above the shattered cities of Cadia, a great rift tore open in the atmosphere, and from it descended the unholy vanguard of the warp. Demons flooded the land. Bloodletters howled as they charged, blades wreathed in flame. Pink horrors gibbered and split into flocks of shrieking fragments. Greater demons stomped across the rubble, their forms so grotesque and immense that to witness them was to feel one's sanity unravel. The sky swam with the sickly glow of the warp, and unnatural shadows danced where no light fell. But the Imperium did not falter. Basilisks fired until their barrels glowed red. Lehman Russ tanks formed spearhead formations, rolling over corpses and wreckage, hammering demons with relentless volleys. Valkyries screamed overhead, launching missile salvos into converging hordes. Battle Sisters formed fiery lines of resistance, their flammers purging anything that moved too quickly or screamed too loudly. In Khazar Myrak, Saint Celestine herself descended, halo blazing, wings of light outstretched. With her came the Gemini Superior, blades singing with righteous fury. Where she walked, hope bloomed anew. Her sword flashed through the thickened air, each stroke banishing demons in cleansing flame. The faithful rallied to her, their courage ignited by her presence. Even the Adeptus Astartes had returned. Reinforcements from the Dark Angels, Space Wolf, and Ultramarines arrived through hastily stabilized warp routes. Their drop pods fell like comets across the continent, slamming into the earth with thunderous force. Bolters roared, chains word screamed, and the ground shook with the fury of transhuman vengeance. At Khazar Garen, the Ultramarines' 4th Company stood like statues, holding the breach against a wave of Night Lords and Plague Zombies, their formation unbroken for 3 days straight. Still, the enemy pressed forward. The Will of Eternity descended into low orbit, ignoring direct fire from remaining orbital defenses. Its gravity wells destabilized local tectonics, causing minor quakes and ripping great rifts into the surface of Cadia. Then, with malevolent purpose, it unleashed its primary weapon. A beam of warp-infused energy lanced from its core, striking the crust of Cadia with cataclysmic effect. Cities evaporated in a flash of white light. Defense bastions disintegrated. Mountains buckled. A seismic shockwave rippled across continents, toppling walls and burying entire regiments beneath tons of collapsing earth. From orbit, fleet quarters scrambled to respond. Admiral Gruss, aboard the Vigilant Vow, ordered a final counteroffensive. What remained of the Cadian fleet, bolstered by Mechanicus vessels and the Astartes strike craft, launched a direct assault on the Will of Eternity. The void battle that followed was the most intense in the system's history. Strike cruisers closed the gap under the cover of plasma fire. Tech priests aboard the Axiom Incarnate disabled portions of the Chaos ship's external shields, allowing for mass boarding actions. Inside the fortress, Space Marines fought their way through warped corridors and endless nightmares. They planted melted charges, set fire to demon engines, and carved a path toward a reactor core. But the fortress was not undefended. The Black Legion counterattacked with terrifying efficiency. Among them was Karn the Betrayer, his axe wet with loyalist blood. Traitor Astartes in midnight black stormed through their own halls to halt the boarding action, their war cries echoing through the metal bones of the behemoth. In close quarters, the battle turned into slaughter. Boarding parties were slaughtered one by one, until only a single Ultramarine squad remained. Led by veteran Sergeant Trigon, the squad detonated their charges near the power regulators before being overwhelmed. Their sacrifice damaged the Will of Eternity's core systems, reducing its weapons output, but it was not enough to stop it. On Cadia, the ground continued to rupture. Fault lines split through the planetary crust. Volcanoes awakened. Storms of warp lightning danced across the sky, but the defenders still held. In the shadow of Khazar Tarok, the remnants of the 104th Cadian stood back to back in the shattered remains of their bastion. They had not slept in 5 days. Their commander, Colonel Virus, had a shattered arm and blood in his eyes, but he kept his voice clear as he gave his final orders. Hold this line. If we fall, the planet dies. They did not fall. Across the plains, a new tide came into view. Not demons nor traitor Astartes, but traitor guard. Regiments once loyal to the Emperor, now pledged to chaos, marched beneath torn Imperial banners. They brought with them corrupted tanks, twisted artillery, and war machines blessed by the Dark Mechanicum. The Battle of Tyrok Field would become legend. The traitor regiments advanced in disciplined columns, draped in flayed skin and cursed heraldry. At their front marched the Brazen Host, once an Astra Militarum unit famed for its honor, now twisted and filled with bloodlust. Behind them came corrupted tanks, Lehman rust holes reshaped with demonic steel, their guns whispering with malignant voices. The air was thick with incense and decay. Colonel Virus gave no speeches. His voice came low and steady. Fire at will. The Cadian lines exploded with lost gun fire. Dozens of heretics fell in the first moments, their ranks torn by precision shots. Heavy bolters rumbled. Mortar teams launched shells high into the churning sky. Plasma cannons melted metal and flesh alike. The Brazen Host did not stop. They returned fire with equal ferocity, laying down storms of bolter and autocannon fire. Artillery shells rained down on the Cadian trench line, lifting entire squads into the air in sprays of blood and dirt. Psychers marched alongside the traitors, their eyes glowing, unleashing bolts of warp energy that incinerated entire platoons in seconds. Still, the Cadians did not break. St. Celestine led a countercharge to the heart of the Chaos line, wings ablaze, her blade carving a path of holy fire. Around her surged the Sisters of Battle and remnants of Kazakin elites. They struck like lightning, overwhelming the traitor vanguard in a storm of fury. For a moment, the line held. Then came the engines. Defilers, decimators, and Hellbrits emerged from the smoke, wading through the ruined field like titans from hell. Each step crushed the dead beneath them. Each weapon spat annihilation. Twin-linked autocannons shredded squads in seconds. Hellfire missiles screamed overhead, reducing bunkers to craters. The battlefield shook under their advance. To the west, the Space Wolves launched a flanking attack, their rhinos charging through the ash and smoke. At their head ran Bjorn Fireowl, armored in battle-worn Terminator plate, his frost axe gleaming in the gloom. He led his wolf guard into the heart of the enemy, slaying dozens with each swing. But the cost was immense. The Cadian line began to crumble. Khazar Myrak fell in silence, its bastions overrun, its defenders fighting to the last man and woman. Vox channels fell quiet one by one. The skies above darkened as warp storms flared, and demonic reinforcements rained from the heavens in bolts of black flame. In orbit, the remains of the Imperial fleet struggled to maintain position. Admiral Gruss, face pale and uniform torn, stood aboard the bridge of the Vigilant Vow, watching as the Will of Eternity began to descend even lower into Cadia's gravity well. No, they're going to break the planet. He gave the only order left to him. All remaining ships, full assault, ramming speed. It was a suicidal charge. Dozens of cruisers, destroyers, and strike frigates peeled from formation and hurled themselves toward a massive Chaos warship. The sky filled with plasma fire and flak bursts. One by one, the Imperial ships exploded under the barrage of the Black Legion's void cannons. But a few got through. The light of conviction, a battered lunar-class cruiser, slammed into the Will of Eternity's flank. Its reactor going critical on impact. The explosion tore a gash in the hull, revealing layers of internal systems and screaming warp flesh. The damage was not fatal, but it was enough. The ship, destabilized and unable to sustain its orbit, began to fall. On the surface, seismometers screamed warnings. The Will of Eternity, a continent-sized fortress, was falling directly onto Cadia. It was not a weapon of war anymore. It was an extinction-level event. Commissar Jakrin, dug in near the ruins of Kazakrof, turned to his Vox. Evacuate. Everyone now. But there was nowhere to run. The impact came with a silence that lasted a fraction of a second. Then came the sound, the roar of a dying world. The Will of Eternity struck Cadia's surface with apocalyptic force. The crust shattered. Fault lines buckled. Oceans vomited upward into the sky. Mountains split in half. Warp energy, still alive inside the ship's core, detonated in a pulse that flayed reality itself. The planet screamed. Khazars fell like dominoes. Cadian command centers collapsed. Vox networks went dark. From orbit, Cadia broke apart like a dropped glass, its crust fragmenting into tumbling plates of fire and stone. A tidal wave of psychic death rippled through the system, shattering astropathic beacons and silencing navigators mid-scream. And yet, even as the world cracked, Cadians kept fighting. In the ruins, Colonel Virus pulled himself from rubble with a broken leg, rallying the survivors of his regiment. "We are Cadians," he said through bloodied lips. "We do not retreat. We stand." They formed firing lines on drifting landmasses, firing as the ground beneath them tore away. In a shattered temple, Saint Celestine's wings dimmed, but she still stood, blade raised, shielding wounded troopers with her own body. From orbit, the phalanx of the Imperial Fist arrived, its weapons burning paths through the Chaos Fleet, desperately evacuating whoever they could reach. Among them was Inquisitor Greyfax, who had fought to the hell of the lower catacombs, dragging hundreds to safety. She emerged scorched, armor blackened, but eyes burning with cold fury. The last message to leave Cadia was transmitted on an emergency beacon by Admiral Gruss before his flagship broke apart. Cadia Stands. Then silence. In the wake of Cadia's death, the Imperium did not mourn in silence. It burned across Segmentum Obscurus. Worlds that had once looked to Cadia as a bulwark now felt the raw wind of the warp against their spines. Astropathic screams echoed across the void. Light years away, navigators wept blood as the cicatrix maledictum began to pulse into being. The death of Cadia had consequences beyond destruction. It was a wound in reality. The planet had anchored the Cadian Gate, one of the few stable passages through the Eye of Terror. With its fall, the barrier between real space and the warp fractured. Abaddon had done more than win a battle. He had broken the galaxy. But within the Imperium, the word retreat did not come easily. Survivors rallied. Refugees from the burning surface clung to memory and faith. And those few who escaped Cadia carried with them the most precious relic of all, witness. On the phalanx, the survivors gathered in silence. Among them were Space Marines, Sisters of Battle, battered guardsmen, and wounded civilians. They filled the hangars and prayer decks, weeping, praying, or staring into nothing. Inquisitor Greyfax paced alone in a long corridor, armor scorched, the purity seals fluttering from her carapace blackened by soot. Her face was gaunt, eyes sunken, but no less resolute. A voice echoed behind her. "You held longer than we had any right to." She turned. Robot Gilliman stood at the entrance to the corridor, his armor unmarred, the sigil of Ultramar glowing upon his chest. He had come too late to save Cadia, but not too late to hear the stories. Greyfax saluted. "We lost millions. You saved billions." His voice was calm, heavy with weight. "You bought time." She looked away. "I saw what Abaddon did, what he brought. Cadia didn't fall to just war. It fell to the gods." Gilliman's expression hardened. "Then we must make the gods bleed." The loss of Cadia sent a tremor through the soul of the Imperium. On every shrine world and fortress bastion, sermons turned grim, prayers grew desperate. Cadians became more than soldiers, they became martyrs. Monuments were carved before the ash of the planet had even cooled. The phrase Cadia Stands was burned into the Imperium's cultural memory, not as a boast, but as a defiance of annihilation. But the war did not end. Abaddon's fleet surged to the Cadian Gate's shattered remains, pouring like blood to the wound they had torn in the galaxy. The Great Rift, newly born and roiling with warp storms, split the galaxy nearly in two. Warp travel faltered. Empyrean storms isolated entire sectors. Hive worlds starved. Forge worlds went silent, and pilgrimage routes vanished. The Imperium Nihilus was born, a half of the galaxy without the guiding light of the Astronomicon. Chaos had not just won a battle, it had opened a gate to hell. Amid the rising tide, Robert Guilliman moved with purpose. As the resurrected pre-march of the Ultramarines, he had returned to a galaxy in collapse. But where others despaired, he acted. From Mackridge to Hyderfer, he gathered what remained. Scattered Loyalist Space Marine chapters, remnants of shattered Astra Militarum regiments, rogue trader fleets, Mechanicus warforms, and even elements of the Ecclesiarchy. What emerged was the Indomitus Crusade, and with it, the hope of reconquest. Guilliman named new Lords of War. He reforged chains of command, reignited ancient treaties. With the aid of Belisarius' call, he introduced the Primaris Marines, a new breed of transhuman warriors, taller and stronger than their predecessors, their armor gleaming with unknown technologies. They would become the spear of his vengeance. But vengeance needed a flame. Cadia became that flame. On every battlefield, commanders whispered the name. On every crusade fleet, it was etched onto bulkheads and blades. Cadia Stands was no longer a geographic claim. It was a creed. Even the traitors, scattered and victorious, felt its weight. Abaddon had shattered the planet, but he had not shattered its people. In the dark, the survivors of Cadia burned with purpose. Across hive cities and penal colonies, aboard fleet wrecks and drifting void hulks, they reorganized. The survivors didn't fade into obscurity. They were reforged. They called themselves the Ashen Circle, an informal brotherhood of surviving officers, Kazakin commissars, and faith-bound warriors who had seen Cadia fall and refused to let the memory rot. One such warrior, Colonel Virus, his body rebuilt with cybernetics, one arm entirely replaced by Mechanicus augments, stood at the heart of the Ashen Circle's first official deployment. The target, the chaos-held world of Belefros, a former shrine world now bathed in warp fire and demon cults. Virus raised his power sword. They think us broken. Let's remind them who we are. From orbit, dropships screamed down through thick clouds of corruption. Stormtroopers descended with righteous fury, their armor still bearing the Cadian Gate symbol, defiant in green and gray. Saint Celestine herself appeared in a column of golden light, her wings reborn, her expression silent and merciful as she cleaved through heretics like falling stars. Belefros burned. The Ashen Circle made it a warning. Everywhere the Black Legion went, Cadia's wrath followed. No planet retaken, no traitor slain, came without the cry of Cadian vengeance. It was said in the halls of enemy war bands that to face a Cadian survivor was to fight a soldier who had already lived through death, and no greater terror existed. Meanwhile, aboard the Vigilant Reproach, Greyfax and Guilliman stood in private council. The Eye of Terror is no longer bound, she said, her tone cold. Abaddon has unleashed something even he doesn't understand. Guilliman, arms crossed behind his back, looked into the stellar map, its lines distorted by the growing shadows of the warp. I've faced this kind before, but never with this many pieces in play. The Dark Mechanicum, the Word Bearers. The 13th Black Crusade was not just a war. It was a ritual. Greyfax nodded. Cadia wasn't the end. It was the altar. Guilliman stepped away from the map. Then we must become their reckoning. The fires of Cadia still burn in the hearts of those who survived. Across war zones and sector-wide engagements, the word spread of a people who had no home but still fought as if defending one. They became symbols, living ghosts in flak armor and cracked helmets, reminding both friend and foe that there were lines no one crossed unpunished. On the shattered forge world of Grey Delta, where a demon prince of Sench sought to enslave a data core capable of rewriting planetary gravity. A single regiment of Cadian survivors held the main spire for 13 days. No reinforcements came. No supplies reached them. But the demon prince was slain by a melt-a-bomb pressed into its chest by a dying woman who had once guarded the western wall of Kazakrof. Her name was lost, but her last words were recorded. Cadia Stands. In the dark beyond Segmentum Pacificus, a space hulk emerged from the warp. Within it, a Cadian commissar led a contingent of penal legionnaires through corridors swarming with Nurglite rot. The mission was simple: detonate the reactor. He lived long enough to press the charge. The last transmission was static, followed by a single phrase barked through blood: Cadia Stands. Not because the world lived, but because its people refused to die quietly. Abaddon, aboard the Vengeful Spirit, stood at the viewing port of his flagship. The galaxy spun beneath him in disorder, scarred and broken. The eye of terror now stretched wider, reshaping the laws of reality. He had won, but even in victory, something gnawed at him. He had destroyed Cadia, but not Cadia's will. Reports flowed in. Resistance on planets that should have fallen. Regiments reorganizing faster than expected. Survivors sowing rebellion behind chaos lines. Cadian symbols etched into walls of reclaimed cities. Painted on the hulls of loyalist tanks. Chanted in burning trenches. The Despoiler turned to his advisors, the lords, discordant, and demon princes that surrounded his war council. The galaxy burns, he said, but so long as they believe Cadia stands, they will not break. His eyes blazed. Then we must make them forget. But that was impossible. Back on Holy Terra, beneath the silent golden gaze of the Emperor's throne, Robert Guilliman prepared his next campaign. He had seen enough. The Ashen Circle grew daily. Cadian veterans inducted into the heart of his crusade. A new regiment. The 13th Khazar Reborn had formed not of bloodlines, but of ideals. On a dais above the training field, Guilliman addressed the newest recruits. You are sons and daughters of a dead world. But the world did not die for nothing. It died so others could fight. It died so you could rise. He paused. His transhuman gaze met theirs, unflinching. The enemy fears you not because of what you lost. They fear you because you are still here. And you remember. Never let them forget. And with that, the chant began. Slow at first, then rising through Vox amplifiers and echoing to the training spires of Terra. Cadia Stands.